My name is, and I'm the all the DJs. All right, so let's get into it. Hot topic floating around the internet. This picture, I didn't seen this picture on at least 5 or 6 different websites. This is what where's the top? Scroll up. This is Hood Report. So it says says her sons will lose their inheritance if they have a child outside of marriage. So Sam I am, Miss Mom. Our sons are aware that if they have babies out of wedlock, they'll lose their inheritance for them and we'll have to start from scratch. We were clear about this prior to having children. Most boys comfortable with doing this because they have zero standards, expectations, and inheritance. You have to incentivize good behavior / decisions. So the internet is in an uproar because this mom has decided that she's going to make her sons pretty much earn their inheritance. And the way she's going about that is don't have babies out of wedlock. Pretty simple, right? So let's look at some of the comments. Y'all really mad because that their boy, and you subconsciously feel like there should be no consequences for casual sex for men. Like being a baby mama is worse than being a baby daddy. So what happens if they abide by this? So what happens if they abide by this? Then 15 years down the line, they get a divorce because the woman ended up being a horrible person? Will they withhold the inheritance then also? Also, I've always found it super weird for people to discuss an inheritance. Why does anyone feel obligated to the money someone else worked for? Why advertise what you have and what you're going to let someone else have when you're 6 feet under? Do you seriously not watch any true crime TV? So I was just browsing, but let's unpack this because they asked a lot of questions. So what happens if they abide by this? Then 15 years down the line, they get a divorce. Well, they wouldn't have had a kid out of wedlock if they got a 15-year marriage and got a divorce after 15 years. So I think they would satisfy uh, the agreement because the point is to have a wife and then the child. If you guys don't work out 15 years later, the kid is probably a teenager by then. I don't think, I think you've satisfied your end of the deal. Uh, why does anyone feel obligated to the money someone else worked for? So in this particular case, this is the mom, setting a standard for the inheritance. So it's not like the sons are like, hey, we want an inheritance, and then she coming back and uh, putting down this law, this rule. It's more so her driving it. So I don't know why that question came up. Why advertise what you have and what you're going to let someone else have when you're 6 feet under? She just said it was an inheritance. She didn't say how much. She didn't say what that was. It could be a life insurance policy that pays off. It could be, a house. It could be. She didn't say. She just said inheritance. I mean, I think it's okay to, to use the word inheritance. That's kind of broad. It's not very specific. I think in our community specifically, we don't really talk about that much because we inherit debt and bills. So let's keep going. We need some more Jesus in this. What does God want? What's the problem? Inheritance comes with stipulations all the time. So as you can see, there is some split on the decision or on the thoughts of that. So, um, I mean, so I can say for me, I actually went through this somewhat. It wasn't an inheritance tied to it, but my grandfather, back when I was in college, actually, I guess he had been talking to my uncle, and he said this. My grandfather said, "Yeah, your uncle said you was out here wilding out, So um, I'm like, what? What? He didn't use those words. I think he said he out there getting his freak on. I was in the new city, and I'm like, what? Don't let them fill your head with these things. So, uh, we had a conversation, and basically, he had me make a promise to him that I wouldn't have any children prior to getting married. So it was like, handshake promise type of thing. Wasn't any type of inheritance, nothing tied to it, which I mean, I ended up fulfilling the promise. So I probably should have negotiated a little bit better. But no, I upheld my part of it. Um Now the one thing that's not listed here is having intercourse before marriage. The mom just saying don't have any babies out of wedlock. So that's kind of two different topics. Um Now, of course, the best way to have a baby, or the best way to not have a baby, is just to not, you know, inter partake in such activities. But she didn't say that wasn't the root. That wasn't in the stipulations. So, we could take this a step further. And if we're looking at it through a biblical lens or a biblical worldview, you know, the young men shouldn't be out here having sex before marriage to begin with. So I applaud the mom here for putting, a stipulation, you know, and in putting that, inheritance, like, something to earn behind it. And I think, if you're talking about from a biblical lens, we need to take that a step further. And hey, y'all shouldn't be out here partaking in any type of sexual activity, fornication before you're married. And that needs to be the culture. Now you can see how the internet and how people in society reacted just from not having babies. So imagine if it was actually what God prefers and teaches and says, like, hey, don't do this before you're married. Imagine that. We talking about just having babies. We need to push that further. And we're outraged as a society from this when it's really a step further that we need to go. Um, so that just kind of tells you where we are as a society. And I mean, that being the case, it's not that many virgins out here. So we kind of talk about it like it's just an afterthought, but we need to really, this is a step back in the right direction, and we need to push it all the way back to where it needs to be. I saw a comment, I don't think it was in this comment section, but I saw a comment on another post that talked about, well, she's kind of just forcing them to get married in order to have kids. Marriage isn't for everybody. What if they want to have kids, but they just don't desire to be married? And to that, I would say, if you're not a person that desires to be married, then I don't you need to leave the kid thing, just leave that out. I don't think you need to be worried about having kids, because you're setting the kids up. It's not that, okay, single parent households, it's not that the kids can't be successful, it's not that they fail, but if a two parent household, a child needs that. there's studies for this. It's better. It's just better. It's better. Now, of course, you have those households where it's just destructive and toxic. Okay, there are outliers in every situation, but generally speaking, a child that's raised in a two-parent household, mother and father, um, versus just one parent is 10 times, 100 times better. Um, Typically, in a single parent household, the child ends up having a certain lack that's missing from the other parent, and then they build up uh, a negative response towards that parent for not being there. So whether it's conscious or subconscious. So yeah. So the next thing I want to talk about, this was like maybe my late teens, early 20s maybe. I was just riding with my dad in a car. Um, and I don't know, I'm always pondering different things. And the topic of prisons came up, and they were talking about, I guess, prison reform. It was something on the radio, I guess, was playing. And the gears just got to turning, and something was said. I think I heard the term private prison. And I started to think about private. I was like, wait, private prison, because up until then I only thought it was ran by the public, like the government. So the concept of a private prison I had never really pondered, and then I started to think about it. I was like, so wait, you can own a prison as a business, and my dad was like, yeah, and I was like, wait, so if I okay, let me put on my entrepreneur cap. If I want to own a prison, that's an interesting concept. So if I'm in this prison business, cut work. All right. So if I'm in a prison business and this is my business, and I'm I'm in a business to make money. And if this is a prison, that means my product is prisoners, people that we put in jail. So I was always under the impression that you went to jail to do your time, get corrective action, corrective behavior, get reformed and come out a new man, woman, and go on with and become a productive member of society. That was the fairy tale storybook definition of why we even have prisons in the first place. So when I was introduced to the concept of a private prison, I was like, well, it wouldn't make much sense for me to reform anybody, because I don't want them to leave, because I need product. I need people in jail to make money. Like, I'm not in it to get rid of the people. I need the people here. So the concept of a private prison just kind of seemed contradictory to me. So I don't know if many people think about that. Do you understand that people that can own a prison and their sole purpose is to make money? So you know, why would we ever want crime to be reduced? And we're talking about, so private prisons typically will house lesser crimes, a lot of drug related stuff, a lot of non-violent crimes, because they don't want to have that extra security for like the violent criminals. But still, that's just increasing these, petty laws that we have in place that are putting people in prison, and pretty much these people are making profit. So let's look at an article that I was reading, and it says pros and cons of private prisons. So there are two main types of prison systems: U.S. in the U.S., public and private. They vary in how they're run and funded. By the way, this is an article written by uh, website criminaljusticeprograms.com. So I guess it's like trying to sell a criminal justice program or something. I don't know. So they vary in how they run and funded, the rehabilitation efforts they offer, the type of inmates they house, and the level of security they each require. So in comparing, when it comes to overall comparisons, privately run prisons are often less likely to report data on inmate population, staffing, or where the budget was spent. The main difference between the two types of prisons comes down to money. Each for-profit facility or institution houses people who violated the law. They are run by private third-party companies rather than the state government, who runs traditional public prison. Private prisons receive their funding from government contracts, and many of these contracts are based on the total number of inmates. So, like I was saying, the more inmates you got, the bigger contract you get. So this means the more inmates these prisons can hold with longer sentences, the more money they earn. The private companies of today that run prison facilities for the federal government house 8% of the U.S. prison population, which is rising. Public prisons, on the other hand, were the norm until the 1980s. They are owned and operated by the local, state, or federal governments and function as nonprofits. Yada yada. Let me see. Private. Most private prisons include both state level funders. Okay. Research has shown that private prisons will usually choose less violent offenders because serious offenders require an increase in the amount of required security. Thus, public prisons hold more violent offenders and private prisons hold more nonviolent offenders. In fact, the majority of inmates in private prisons have committed nonviolent drug-related offenses. While private prisons may be cheaper, they're also known to be worse for inmate rights and have a higher need of qualified correctional officers. So, and then there's just a lot of statistics. So I mean, there was a part in here that talked about rehabilitation. I think I glazed over it, but the main thought here is, why are we allowing prisons to be a private business, when the idea, or I thought I thought the idea was to rehabilitate and correct. And I could just imagine. And the article said the facilities are poor, these private facilities, they just trying to have the most people they can have in there. And these are lives. Like, these are people's lives. Yeah, you made a mistake. Yeah, there's a lot of, and then the way that society's set up, the system is set up, some people choose to get a second job, a third job, and some people just choose to go the quick route. And depending on where you're from, the decision you make, some people take that decision. And some people are successful. It's a risk. It's like gambling. Some people are successful and hit the jackpot, and some people get caught and busted and make future wrong decisions and just kind of go down a bad path. But yeah, outside of violent crimes, these non-violent type of crimes, and we just petty putting people in jail. There was another. No, this is not. We're not on that one yet. Yeah. So yeah. So I'm sure I'm willing to bet that you've probably been to a restaurant in the United States at some point in your life. And typically, if you go to a restaurant, there's going to be a waitress or a server, and they're going to take your order, bring you some drinks, get your food, stuff like that. And then, depending on how friendly they are, um, at the end you get your bill. You'll leave them a tip. And it used to be, the tip was based on the level of service. So fast forward, now we have, gratuity, and now we're at a point where now the gratuity or the tip is like included in the price now. And we even have, the Department of Labor, and this has just kind of been the norm for a while. You're able to pay less than the minimum wage because it's a tip position, and the tips are supposed to offset the income of the minimum wage that you're paying. So you can pay a waitress or a waiter, as low as $2.13 as a salary, as a minimum wage, because you're anticipating the tips, and the tips offset the salary. But my question is, who said we, the American consumer, was supposed to pay the wages of your wait staff? When did we get to, or how did we start this? How did this become something that, okay, our, what, okay, let me give you my thought of a tip. The concept of tipping is, okay, this is a waitress. They work here at this establishment, and they served me, earning their living doing their job. And then because they did a great job, they had a great personality, my cup never was empty, refills, just made the experience that, you know, it was enjoyable, and they went the extra mile, and it made it a memorable experience. It was at 10 is the where it's supposed to be at, but they went above and beyond that. Let me give them a bonus, a tip, a little bonus on top of that to say thank you, keep up the good work. When I come back, I want to sit in your section again and get the same level of service. When I sat over there last time, it wasn't like that. It was just mediocre, standard, nothing out of the norm. But that's not the case. We at the point of, if I go out to eat, I gotta pay the waiter. I'm paying the waiter's wages. It's like I gotta pay for you to have waiters at your restaurant. How did we need to how did we get to this point? Like, who agreed that us, the American consumer, should hire the wait staff for these restaurants? And then, if that is the case, if we do agree on that, then is there an option for me to wait on myself? I can take my own order. I go to the kitchen, get my own food. I mean, nowadays you got the QR codes, you can order online and stuff like that. But I'm talking about, these restaurants where, you know, you don't have that. You have to have a waiter. So there's no alternative. This is your employee who agreed to pay them $2.13, and I share in the wages. Plus, I got to pay for my food and all of that. Who agreed on this? So let's take a look at some of the history of waiters tipping. Now, I did a Google search pretty much on the history of tipping, and everything that popped up, it connected it to slavery and racism. So I just pulled up a couple of those articles because I mean, everything that literally came up in the top searches were dealing with that. So this one is time.com. It says it's the legacy of slavery. Here's the troubling history behind tipping practices in the U.S. So this was by Rachel Greenspan. These days, the expectation of U.S. restaurants that diners will tip their servers is a key part of culinary economy. Tips subsidize a server or bartender salary at the vast majority of nearly 650,000 restaurants in the country. Tipping wasn't always a part of the U.S. dining landscape, and scholars who have studied its origins point out that its oft debated role in the modern economy isn't the only thing potentially troubling about tips. In the earliest days of practice, its spread was linked to the racial oppression of the post-Civil War Reconstruction period. The idea of giving someone money for their work isn't one that really needs an origin story, but modern American tipping, the practice of the customer giving a gratuity on top of the money that the employee gets from his or her employer, does have a beginning. And we've heard of the uh, the to ensure promptness was the phrase that was the acronym is supposed to mean tip, but that's just a myth. Some accounts credit European travelers with bringing the custom to the U.S. Others credit American travelers bringing it back from Europe. Um, what's the truth? Wealthy Americans in the 1850s and 1860s discovered the tradition, which had originated in medieval times as a master serf custom wherein a servant would receive extra money for having performed superbly well on vacations in Europe. So that sounds like what I just said, right? That sounds exactly like what I just said. So back in the medieval times, you had the rich, the masters, and then the serfs, which were the servants. It was a custom where, okay, the servant, they probably wasn't even paying them. That was just the servant. But well, in a serf, the serfs did get paid a little wage, but on top of your service, they gave them a little extra for doing superbly well. So that was the original concept. That was it. So at first, most diners were largely against it. So we put up a fight, deeming it both inherently condescending and classist. How could poor Americans be expected to pay for their food and add a tip on top? In fact, there was so much anti tipping traction that in the 1860s the attitude spread to Europe. That's one reason why there's no tipping expected at most European restaurants today. I didn't know that. According to Saru Jayaraman, co-founder and president of Restaurant Opportunity Centers United. Blah, blah, blah. What are they talking about? So it actually got to the point where in Europe, they just cut it out. They like, we don't do that no more. So let's go to the other one. The racist history behind America's tipping culture. They said tipping proliferated in the United States after the Civil War, so they pretty much agree on that. When restaurant and hospitality industries hired when the restaurant and hospitality industries hired newly emancipated black women and men, but offered them no wage, leaving them to rely on patrons' gratuities for their pay instead. So this is povertylaw.org. And they're saying they went a step further, and they're saying that it originated or it proliferated, got widespread when black women and men who were freed were off. They offered them no wage, but they had to rely on the patrons' gratuities for their pay instead. You're likely familiar with minimum wages, where workers are paid hourly, anywhere from $7.25, but that's not the case for the tipped sub minimum wage has remained at $2.13. Um, Simply put, tipping was introduced as a way to exploit the labor of former slaves. So that's their claim. And then here's Saru Jayarama again. They quoted him. It's the legacy of slavery that turned the tip in the United States from a bonus or extra on top of a wage to the wage itself. So that's the answer right there. That's my answer. It's the legacy, and this is the co-founder of the Restaurant Opportunity Center United, Rock United. He says again, it's the legacy of slavery that turned the tip in the United States from a bonus or extra on top of a wage to a wage itself. So that's it. That answers the question. My original question was how did we get from bonus to we got to pay the wage? And it was because of the slavery. It was the freed slaves that they didn't want to. They didn't want to pay away. They used to them being slaves. Y'all can work here. We ain't paying you. It's still slavery. You got to rely on the tips. And because of that, nah, we stuck with it. So we're we've maintained a slave practice, and it's a lot of stuff that we've maintained. And we always talk about, oh, slavery ended, racism is this, and we still have these racist slavery type prejudices and customs that we still have in place. And it's time we tear all this stuff down. Am I saying I don't want waiters and I'm in the hospitality industry. You know, I started as a bellman. I enjoyed the tips, but as a as a bellman or in the hospitality industry, you might you might make a little bit closer to minimum wage in a in a restaurant industry. You're wait bartenders, you're making way below minimum, and your tips are you're relying on that. And you can say, okay, well, just get another job. But some people are good at that. Some people, that's their passion. Some people they should be in that industry. Maybe they aspire to own a restaurant. Maybe they aspire to, be in that restaurant business, a cook, move up the ranks. You got to start somewhere. Some people working their way through college. The restaurants need to pay a living wage, at least the federal minimum, and tips should be a bonus. If you bust your behind and you provide excellent service and somebody feels like they want to give a bonus, then that shouldn't count as your minimum pay. And Uncle Sam need to get out your pockets and shouldn't be taxing and stuff either. That's a bonus. Like, get out people's pockets. Don't tell them. Don't 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 say it too loud because they're gonna try to come get us. But come on, man. We gotta tear down some of these social norms and just get back to common sense, like just common think, put on our thinking caps, and so that's all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like. Do I have that? Yeah, like, share, subscribe. Thanks for watching the video. Catch y'all on the next one.